Hello, worship arts. It's John chapter 4 time. Now, John chapter 4 has two major stories that are essential in what John is trying to cover when it comes to discussing who Jesus is, what Jesus does, both for the people around him during Jesus' actual ministry, as well as then what Jesus does through today, tomorrow, onward. So the first story, because we're just going to go right on into it. So open up to John if you haven't, if you're like me and you didn't open it up before the video. John chapter 4. The first story goes from verses 1 all the way through 45, and it's hopefully one that's familiar to you. What I'd like you to do actually at the start here is just to save time, I'm going to ask that you just read through it individually on your own so that I can save my voice and not read it at you for this whole time. So at this point, I'd like you to pause the video and read through the entirety of the Jesus and the woman of Samaria story. Now, hopefully you paused and now you're back again. And if you didn't pause now, read the story and then keep watching the video and listening. This story is massively important, and there's so many things that are going on. So first, what I want to talk about, and it's addressed in the story, there was a lot of strife and issues between Jews and Samaritans at the time. They're actually defined as like different ethnic groups, and in their differences, and there's actually a lot of ethnic similarity between them, but in their difference, they're bred a lot of hatred and violence and strife and discrimination between these two groups of people. Now, the Jews, they had a hold on Jerusalem. We see that in what the woman even says in this story. Is she says, "You Jews say that Jerusalem is the only place that you can worship God," and we know from the last, from chapter 2, that there was an actual reality to formal Jewish officials who were highlighting the temple as it's either worship God here or you can't worship God. Now, in this strife, there was plenty of opportunity for there to be actual road that would have allowed Jesus to completely avoid the region of Samaria altogether. But Jesus goes right through it, and because we know that Jesus knows he's going to have this conversation and that it's going to be something that's crucial for his disciples to see, as well as then for all Christians, including us today, to actually learn and actually apply to ourselves. So, a couple things to point out. One thing I want to say is this woman here is not someone that would be expected to receive these like huge teachings of Christ in the story. She's not a Jew, which already the Jewish people of the time would have had issue with that. It's like, well, who is she to talk to the Messiah? But in her ethnic background, in her life story, and we know from what Jesus says that she hasn't had the most like ethical, morally righteous life. In her mixed background all the way around, she's one of the people at this stage who's like most ready for who Jesus is. She says, like, we know that there's a Messiah coming, and that if we could only know who it was, we would fall down and worship him, that we would look to who this is. And Jesus says, it's me. And she doesn't question it. It says she like immediately is like, that makes sense. Think of the people who should have known better that when Jesus is acting as God are immediately questioning, saying, no, that can't be God. That can't be this Messiah. She's ready for him. And later, when he says to the disciples, he says that the harvest is ready. The harvest is ready. There's people who are ready for the good news of Christ. There's people who are ready to actually be healed and restored and brought back to God. So the disciples, us today, leaders of worship, we're invited in into what God's doing. Jesus says basically, do you want to reap this harvest? Jesus says, I've already sown what needs to be sown. The Spirit is going to carry God's word. Do we want to be a part then of building up God's community, even to people who we would assume it's not for? And that's part of the challenge of this story for us, is are we willing to take down our own boundaries, take down our own stigmas that we can build up about other people, to be a part of what God might be doing in their lives, or even be open to what God might be doing in our life through them. We're encouraged to not see people as different, but instead encouraged to see people as all part of God's children. And God invites us to be a part of that process. We know through the story that Jesus doesn't leave anyone out. Jesus doesn't leave anyone out. And we've seen that already in some stories we've read so far in this book. Jesus doesn't leave people out. Jesus brings people in and abolishes things that were going to keep them out. The next story here in chapter 4, Jesus heals an official's son. It's our second sign of Jesus included in John out of our 7 signs that are showing Jesus' lordship, Jesus' divinity. So, in this story, it says, and this is at verse 46, Jesus came again to Cana in Galilee where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him." The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. Jesus heals this boy solely through his words, without even having to actually go in person to where this boy is at. From afar, Jesus just speaks it, just says, the boy is going to live. He's going to be okay. And the boy recovers. Jesus, through his words, brings healing and brings life. And if that doesn't make you immediately think of Genesis 1, then think of Genesis 1. When God speaks and then life happens, life is created. We know from what John says in chapter 1 of this very book that Jesus is the word that God uses to create life. The words God speaks are Jesus. So Jesus is the life bringer, the life creator. It's through Jesus' words and his words alone that Jesus brings life and healing, that Jesus restores. This is our second sign then of Jesus as God, of Jesus as divinity. We have that Jesus turns water into wine, which also then points us to what Jesus is going to do on the cross. And we have him healing this official's son, showing that by his words alone, Jesus brings healing and brings life. That's our chapter 4 study. We'll see you in the discussions. God bless you. May the grace and peace of Christ be with you. And I'll see you in videos for next week, as well as see you online. God bless you guys.